You're listening to episode 72 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Elad Levinson and Hanuman Goleman join us to talk about More Than Sound's program, Thriving on Change, the Evolving Leaders Toolkit. My favorite times of day are early morning and late at night. All is quiet and still, and I have a little time to myself to pause, reflect, and recharge. But if your life is like mine, that may not be what your day is like, with a constant ebb and flow, and sometimes rush, of change. Moving within the chaos of change isn't easy, but there are ways to learn how to surf those waves. Course developer and facilitator Elad Levinson has spent over 45 years of experience as a leadership coach and organizational consultant. He's currently an organizational effectiveness consultant. Elad has been a senior organization development and learning and development professional at Agilent, Stanford University, ICANN, and several startups. Hanuman Goleman is the owner of More Than Sound Productions, a small independent audio production and publishing company located in Northampton, Massachusetts. His company was formed for the love of audio, and their mission is to understand great audio, seek out great ideas, and combine these to improve our world. Our guests today are Elad Levinson. Elad, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Hanuman Goleman. Hanuman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Ted. Very happy to be here with you.
Very pleased to have both of you in this conversation today. And I want to start by introducing you to the listeners so they can find out a little bit more about you. Elad, why don't we start with you? Tell us about your background.
Sure. It all began for me, in a way, with my insatiable appetite for reading. I was in the public library in a town in Northern California, and I was going to the science fiction section, and the book by Alan Watts called The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are fell on my head.
Sure sign.
Sure sign. It came into I put in my arms, and I was looking through it, and something really resonated for me. I was about 17 years old, and was a practicing Jew, very, very involved in the temple and also the Jewish Community Center. And the emphasis on authenticity and knowing who you were was quite an insight for me. I read the book. And then there was a period of quiet where I didn't really have any further exploration until my early 20s. I had finished graduate school in social work, and I was running a residence camp for children in Northern California called Camp Tawanga. And after my fourth year there, I was introduced by somebody who was on my staff to something called meditation. I really had not. Of course, you hear the word occasionally in Jewish services, but the concept of meditation wasn't really something I'd had any real understanding of. And so with his encouragement, I spent Thanksgiving 1970 at a meditation retreat, and it had a profound effect on me. The external profound effect was that I lost 100 pounds that first year and also quit smoking. Mm-hmm. In fact, I forgot that I smoked. It was more like that. Like 3 weeks later, I remembered, oh yeah, I used to do something called smoking. And then my natural curiosity kind of took over, and I decided that I wanted to understand what had happened, because it had been so like a depth charge in my psyche, and I wanted to study further. So with a little bit of help from the sale of a house and some savings, I spent 4 years not working full time and exploring every religious or spiritual practice that was kind of available, which there were quite a few at that point. This was 1971 through 74, and there were lots and lots of new introductions to Asian religious practices, spiritual practices. So I had a chance to study with some of the most well-recognized Tibetan Zen practitioners, gurus. It was very, very enjoyable. I mean, I really liked having access to so many different experiences. And kind of at the end of that, at the end of the fourth year, I really felt like I wanted to go back into the work world, but I also knew that I had been changed very dramatically by the 4 years. And luckily for me, or I don't know how these things work exactly because they're kind of mysterious, I ended up getting a job working in an alcoholism facility, teaching meditation, relaxation training, and also working as a psychotherapist. And in some ways, that period, that 4 years that I worked in the alcoholism facility was really very well-rounding, because I was introduced to, I guess you would call integrative spirituality. Like the 12-step programs were a terrific lesson in how do you take really abstract concepts like gratitude or surrender and put them into practice in your daily life. It really very, very much affected me, and I really loved the 12-step programs and attending them. After the time with this alcoholism facility, I began to teach stress management classes. So 1970, I guess it was about 1976, 1977, I began to teach a program that I had developed called Managing Stress to Increase Productivity. I now know that it could have easily have been called mindfulness-based stress reduction.
What a different world we'd be living in right now.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of the West Coast evolutionary version, although mine really wasn't emphasizing so much the mental health aspect of it. It was really aimed at helping people who were working in companies apply mindfulness and wellness to their daily jobs, their daily life. Because I was really fascinated. I have been really fascinated my whole life at the intersection between consciousness, awareness, personal responsibility, and how we put that into practice in our work lives. And that set in motion really what I've been doing for the last 35, 40 years. The natural outgrowth of that was that every time I would kind of get really good at something like teaching stress management, somebody would come along and they'd say, could you apply these same principles to time management? Yeah, sure, I can do that. Well, how about communication? And so I'd find myself, teaching a communication course, basically really encouraging the skills of deep listening, settling, being mindful of your own reactions to what you were hearing and feeling, sensing, and then speaking from a place that was calm and thoughtful, really contemplative rather than reactive. The field of training and development became kind of my first foundation in working in corporations. And then I became known as somebody who was really adept at understanding larger systems. And so I became a organizational development consultant, mostly because companies would say, well, these training programs are really good, but we seem to not have much reinforcement for them, and the company itself isn't really changing, maybe individuals, but we're not getting really much of an effect on the larger system. What would you do about that? And so I began to devise organization-wide change initiatives that would take a particular important concept or an idea to the company. Like an example would be one of the biggest initiatives that I started and followed through with over 3 years was to take a group of people who had been in a startup and the CEO asked if I would help them become professional managers. Well, to be able to do that, you really have to look at every aspect, every reinforcer within the company's life, which would include, who you recruit and what you're looking for and the kind of talent that you're bringing in and what kind of skills you need to start people with. And that really, in some ways, kind of led me to this most recent incarnation called Thriving on Change. And, as we talk about it, one of the things that I'll come back to is that I discovered very, very early on that there were 3 core foundational competencies that you had to have to be able to be a really outstanding leader. One was that you had to have some self-possession. You had to know what you were feeling, thinking, and sensing. You had to be able to corral it and make sure that it didn't spill over as a contagion, and that you also were able to use that awareness in speaking and listening in the form of empathy. And then the second core skill is being able to corral and focus your attention, either in letting it relax or in letting it settle and be concentrated and to keep it in one place for a period of time. And then the third competency, which turned out to be in some ways the most intuitively unobvious aspect, which is learning how to communicate effectively and compassionately under pressure. The evidence from my experience working inside companies for almost 50 years is that most of the companies, if not all of the companies I've worked for, really lose traction. They lose progress on their goals. They lose their way because there are these difficult conversations that are not taking place, or they're taking place really ineffectively.
Thank you very much for that background. And Hanuman, let's find out a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So I guess I'll take it back a little bit as well. I was a part of the first teen retreat at IMS, the Insight Meditation Society, in 1989. That was led by Michelle McDonald and Steve Smith and guided by Sayadaw U Pandita. And I was 14 then, and that really planted the seeds for me of practice in my life that continued for many years. And I found myself in the late 90s in Bodh Gaya on the Buddhist Studies program through Antioch College. And through that got exposure to different practices. You focus on Vipassana for a little, and we had the great fortune of being taught by some amazing teachers there, and then Zen for a little while, and then Tibetan Buddhism for a little while. And that practice has really been formative. My practice now is a combination, I would say, of Theravada Vipassana and Tibetan style. And it's really been formative in my humanity in the world. The more I practice, the more I understand what it is to be human, and that really drives how I want to be in the world, what what actions I want to take and what I want to manifest. And so to bring it back specifically to More Than Sound and Thriving on Change, this great course that Elad created, I got out of graduate school, and my father is Dan Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence, and he and I were talking about what I might do after grad school. My training is audio documentary, and my interest, my real heart's passion in the world is to record elders singing songs from their childhood in places where electricity is not taken hold so much, so that there's still a rich oral tradition. That's really fallen to the wayside now, sadly for me, quite honestly, because I still feel very, very passionately about that. So what happened was, after I got my degree, I was talking with Dan about what I might do, and it had been 10 years since Emotional Intelligence was published, and a lot of science had happened in the meantime, and he was interested in updating some of those ideas. And so we got the idea of getting him in the studio with those people who he might interview for a book, and instead doing an audio series around that. And that's what initially built More Than Sound. It was a series called Wired to Connect: Dialogues on Social Intelligence. And from there, I really, honestly, it was a bumbling and a fumbling through the last 10 years. I feel like More Than Sound has grown despite myself. And because I had no formal training in business, and certainly no management training, I think I'm mostly a nice person, and certainly try to be, and that's created a decent environment, I think, for my colleagues here. But it was really, very honestly, an opportunistic enterprise. I saw this as a thing that I could do, and so I went ahead and did it, and that became really not terribly fulfilling ultimately, which is no surprise, I suppose. And so, well, I guess we're going to get to
perfect time to segue into this. What's the story of how you two met?
Great. So I've been very interested in mindfulness practices and offering mindfulness practices for various aspects of our daily lives. For instance, we did a mindfulness of driving CD, and with Michelle McDonald and with Mirabai Bush, we did a working with mindfulness CD for practices at work.
I have it myself. It's a great CD.
Oh, thank you. Great. And in that, I began to talk with a teacher at Spirit Rock about doing an online course with her work. And at that time, Elad was working there as Elad, will you help me with this? The director of programming?
I was the director of programs and community development.
And so Elad and I met through that, and had a few conversations around what an online course might look like. And ultimately, that course did not happen. But when Elad left that position, you got in touch with me and asked if I might be interested in developing a course with you around mindfulness and the integration of mindfulness and leadership development, and these really have been our strong offerings here at More Than Sound around leadership competency development, specific to the emotional intelligence world, and then the mindfulness offerings, and it's something I've wanted to do for 6 or 7 years here, is really concretely bring those two threads together. And so, Elad, when you got in touch, I was very excited to begin that endeavor with you, and it really took off from there.
One of the things that was quite remarkable, Ted, was to be able to talk with someone who has this unique blend that Hanuman does of being a craftsman in this world of media, and also to have such a deep, spiritual meditative practice himself, and to have had years where he's been exploring leadership. Really an ideal arrangement, in terms of somebody to start this with, because I think that, what we set out to do reminds me very much of their point in Lord of the Rings, where they're up against an army that's 17, times the size of their army. And the dwarf, is asked, well, are you in or are you out? He says, well, I'm paraphrasing. He says, well, basically, we don't have a chance. It's going to be a total and absolute destruction. Yeah, sure. I'm ready for it.
I'm there.
I'm there. I'm all in.
Oh, the dwarves. Gotta love the dwarves.
And, I think that that's kind of what we set out to do, which was to take what you might call an emerging field. Is definitely not a leading indicator in terms of what companies are thinking about, really more of a lagging indicator, meaning that, by afterthought, many companies are saying, well, look, we have morale problems, people are not engaged. We're having a real problem with people who have a lack of focus because they are splitting their attention among so many different initiatives and all these distracting screens. And let's do a mindfulness program. And my premise that I approached Hanuman with was, this is not a program about mindfulness. This is a leadership training program in which there are 3 core competencies. The first core competence is the development of awareness. And that development of awareness is not restricted to self-awareness. It's also awareness of others and what they're thinking, feeling, and sensing, so that you have at least an interest into who you're speaking to and what they may be bringing to a conversation. And then, as Dan Goleman, so nimbly put, you also have to have awareness of context, of the organizational context that all of this is taking place in. Because if you don't have some kind of political sophistication, you can't really influence. And then the second core competence was being able to direct and manage your own attention. And that takes a tremendous amount of training, because the cultural norm is for people's attention to be directed by others. And then this third area, we ended up calling goodwill. Initially, when I approached Hanuman, we were talking about compassion in the workplace. But I made a decision that compassion was not what leaders thought about, nor was it what they talked about. What they did talk about was, I got to get this guy to help me on this thing, or, that team that we have to work with over there, that engineering team, we really need them to want to help us. And so how do you generate goodwill, and how do you cultivate it and keep it? And so the section in the program that has to do with goodwill is this really interesting combination of a very, very well thought of program called Crucial Conversations, which I believe is the best I've ever seen. It's something, when I worked at Agilent, we brought it in and had 1,500 scientists, leaders take the program, and the feedback was tremendous. And so rather than try to reinvent the wheel or plagiarize, I decided to just say, look, the best thing you could do is to learn about Crucial Conversations and go take the course. And so we promote Crucial Conversations in the course, and we also have the wonderful hour interview with Joseph Grenny, who wrote the book along with his colleagues. And so the goodwill section really has to do with how do you, first of all, generate goodwill internally by thinking and feeling in a particular way, like directing your attention in a particular way. And then once you're in dialogue and you're having conflict, what do you do?
So, Hanuman, what was this like for you as you were starting to piece it together? Was the idea very abstract and started to take shape? How did that work for you?
Well, luckily I had the opportunity to work with somebody who has been doing this work for many, many years. And Elad, over the course of your career, you had built, I don't know how many filing cabinets full, but you had gathered a lot of notes and information. And so the piecing it together was really on Elad's side initially. And that happened in a presentation that we recorded and really built on from there. And that said, we had many, many long conversations about developing this coursework, and it was honestly just a joy. It was really fun to work with you, Elad, on that, developing this material. And when working with somebody who I respect in their background and training and ability, and also who has a similar approach, I suppose. There's a positive intent, a beneficial intent that I think is at the core of both of our approaches. It's just such a joy. And
Can I break in just a second?
Please, yes.
I want to tell you a story, Ted, that will really illustrate this. So Hanuman and I, being on opposite coasts, had to figure out how we were film and then audio record things. And so I came to Hanuman's hometown in the dead of winter. I think it was like the November, and of course there was snow on the ground, and it wasn't at all California weather.
different than Petaluma.
It wasn't Petaluma. It was, we were not in Kansas anymore. And for 6 days, Hanuman and I and a wonderful studio recording person, locked ourselves in a studio, and we worked from basically 9 o'clock, in the morning until 6 or 7 at night, filming and going over and over, certain parts of the video. And here's what's remarkable to me is that, first of all, the notion that you could spend 6 days of concentrated time with really no breaks. I mean, we had, lunch, and occasionally we would step out and stretch a little bit, but it was just focus, 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 focus. And it's the ideal situation for people to become angry, resentful, irritated, difficult, short with each other. And
it's a petri dish for difficult emotions.
It was. But instead, what happened was that, Hanuman and I'm going to step back and just, kind of say what I think is that Hanuman and I were really demonstrating what we had learned through all our years of meditation practice. And so instead, what ended up happening was that there was humor and goodwill, and when there was difficulty, we talked about it openly, and, we were able to, stay kind of in current moment with each other instead of, dragging along what happened yesterday. And at the end of it, the three of us all felt like we had just done something really quite remarkable, and we had done it in a way that we felt proud of ourselves and really pleased with being kind under extraordinary pressure. And I joked with Hanuman that I thought, the story of how we created the video is a perfect example of why this video, Thriving on Change, is going to be a very impactful for people, because it speaks directly to what actually works.
Yeah, that's right. And to give you an idea of the scope of this course, we've recorded over 100 videos over the course of those days. So, and they range anywhere from 3 to 15 or 20 minutes each. And it's just the offering that we eventually ended with is robust.
It is, and you have many co-instructors on this. It's not just one person. You've got Daniel Goleman, Hanuman, your father. You've got Mirabai Bush, and a list of other people who those who are meditators will recognize many of the names here. And it's really fascinating and encouraging, I would say, to see this wonderful mutual support in how different teachers and different organizations can come together to produce something that is helpful for others, that it doesn't have to be competitive and conflictive, that it can be mutually supportive and engaging.
Ted, thank you for bringing that up. One really good example of that is that if you know anything about the field of research, one of the things that is always mentioned is that researchers or academics are very much at odds with practitioners. You know, there's the world of practice and then there's the world of pure theory. Well, this video, the co-instructors include some of the top researchers in the world on mindfulness. Just to give you an example, Jane Dutton from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business has been hammering away at the relationship between compassion and productivity in organizations for 28 years. And, you know, when she speaks about what she's learned, it's like listening to somebody, you know, bringing the weight of evidence of almost 30 years of thought and really rigorous analysis to, well, does compassion actually make a difference? And yes, it does. And the way that it does is it tends to produce high quality relationships in which people are much more likely to want to work together.
Yeah, and you also have Teresa Glom, professor of organizational behavior at University of Minnesota. So it's good to see another Minnesotan there. And it's just amazing to see this kind of mix, which you don't typically have, let alone on an online course, which I think is fascinating. And I wanted to ask Hanuman if the experience of bringing on these different people with different backgrounds and different personalities together made an interesting time for you, mixing it all into a cohesive story. What was that like?
I think it's one of the things that, as you're saying, makes this course unique, and really the effectiveness that it can offer to people does come from its foundation in both deep practice and really rigorous research that are brought together in this. For me, that is not a huge leap. I think largely because I have had the remarkable opportunity of working with people who are academics and practitioners since I began More Than Sound, and my father being a good example of that. He's, his first published book was on different types of meditation, and yet he was an academic for a while, and certainly his colleagues who now have become, many of whom have become my authors here at More Than Sound, are really top-notch academics and understand the deep importance of mindfulness practice or whatever their individual practice may be. And I think that right now, the idea of a spiritual practice in the context of a work environment is becoming less taboo because, well, at least through the last century, I think it's safe to say, and I would be surprised if not beyond, people do have spiritual sides to themselves, and it's been a taboo to bring that into work. But yet, I think the most effective leaders have always had aspects of what Elad has presented, whether it's thought of as spiritual practice or not. But things like focused attention have always been critical for real productivity and for moving things forward, for being at the edge. And so it's not a great leap for me, and it's a wonderful joy to being a part of this. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Elad?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've hinted at something that I think is an important part of this conversation, which is, what is the readiness? What's the state of readiness within organizations and individuals for a program of this depth and breadth? And I keep coming back to something that I read in Harvard Business Review, which now many people are familiar with, which is the acronym VUCA, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think that it really speaks to the environment that people are working in, that the levels of stress that are caused by those four factors really lead people to two behaviors, neither of which are particularly productive, one of which is to keep on doing the same thing that they've always done in the hope that, somehow it'll work again, even when it's not.
Definition of madness.
Yeah, a definition of madness. And then secondly, to kind of flail about, reacting to the environment, the competitive environment, the, supplier environment, the technology environment, rather than really having a deeply considered, thoughtful response that is at least one part intuitive. I mean, there's plenty of room for analysis and kind of using our wonderful problem-solving analytic capability. But if you don't add deep reflection and if you don't add intuition to the mix, then you're going to tend to keep on doing the same thing over and over again. So the program, Thriving on Change, one of the factors in it is that it's competency-based, meaning that you could take it off the shelf, you could open it anywhere, you could listen for 15 minutes, and anywhere that you picked it up, there would be an emphasis on how do I actually do something different, better, and to improve on my performance using these tools and skills. And the tools and skills are transformative. Mindfulness is transformative, meaning that it changes the way that you look at something so that the same problems exist, but the way you're looking at it is different.
Yeah, there's so much value in simply pausing for a moment and checking our own filters that we may be applying without being fully aware that we're doing so. That, again, as you're saying, Elad, the situation itself, it's the same one, but we're coming at it from a completely different direction, and that opens up new ways to creatively think about problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
So, gentlemen, I wanted to ask if you had any last thoughts for the listeners before we part. Elad, if we can start with you.
Well, one thing I feel really good about the program is that it's what some people would call scalable. And what I mean by that is that you as an individual could purchase the program and get tremendous benefit as a leader and put it into practice just because you wanted to. And the outcome of that would be that you would find yourself with an elevated kind of sense of possible ways of approaching problems that had really been baffling, and beginning to see like, okay, there really, not only is there a light at the end of the tunnel, but I actually can move towards it. It also can be used really effectively with teams, intact work teams who would choose to take the program and to apply it to their team development. I would find that they were really moving much more fluidly and also with much less friction, because there's so many different ways that they can incorporate the tools and skills in the team life. And then third is that it's really designed for a organization-wide change initiative. But it would take a very, very special and unique organization to do it as a whole system. It would require a real visionary in the leadership team who recognize that the organization must go from A to A prime and to really be focusing on transformational change rather than incremental change. But it has all of the elements, and as Hanuman and I have, designed this, it's the kind of program that can be repackaged and repurposed really effectively, depending upon the company's needs.
Thank you for that. And
Sure.
Hanuman, how about you? What are some last thoughts you might want to share with the listeners?
So 2 weeks ago, I was talking with a friend who's the director of marketing at a discount luxury item website. And she was describing to me the environment in which she works, and how the turnover is very rapid, and the environment is so full of stress and difficulty, emotional difficulty, that it's a base requirement for her to go to a de-stressing meditation class a few times a week. And that really drove home for me the importance of this work once again. And how I really found my legs here at More Than Sound was to center in the great benefit that this work can have for real human experience, and the deep need that we have in so many work environments across the country, but around the world, to bring in wisdom and compassion into those environments. And that's really the center of the work that I'm doing now. And Thriving on Change is a perfect example of the offerings that we have here that really can help somebody transform themselves if their environment isn't transforming around them, like Elad was just saying, to transform our perspective, and through that to become more effective and potentially to transform an entire environment. And that is really the heart of what we're doing here at More Than Sound and this course, Thriving on Change. So I feel very fortunate to have been a part of this.
I think that's a wonderful point that you raise, that we sometimes will tend to think of our practice, and whether we refer to it as a spiritual practice or a way of being, or however we want to cast that wide net, that it doesn't have to be just snippets like your friend was describing in their personal life, that it's really the totality of your life, and that does include the workplace. So having an opportunity to maybe see a shift, maybe a subtle one, maybe a very subtle and profound shifting in the workplace. Just think, those of you who are listening to this, what would that be like? What would that be of value to you? How would that change your life? What would it be like? Our guest today, Elad Levinson. Elad, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Ted. Thank you very much.
And Hanuman Goleman. Hanuman, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you, Ted. It was fun.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.